Ernest Hemingway once wrote, "The world is a fine place and worth fighting for." I agree with the second part.
People quote that line from Seven because it feels like a lifeline, an exhausted attempt to salvage something from the wreckage. But if you sit with it long enough, it starts to sound less like hope and more like resignation. There's a rhythm to Seven that feels closer to lament than thriller. It's not a story about a killer or even about the detectives trying to stop him. It's a meditation on how corruption becomes mundane, how violence seeps into the seams of daily life until there's no clear border between civilization and decay. Two men stand in that decay, one who has already accepted it as inevitable, and another who still imagines it can be cleansed. This is not a film about justice. It's about rot. It's about moral exhaustion, the failure of institutions, and the seduction of despair. At its core, it is a character study, one centered around Detective Somerset, who has watched the world corrode so thoroughly that withdrawal feels like the only sane response. Through him, the darkness of the city comes into focus. Somerset doesn't speak like someone seeking reassurance. He speaks like someone who has tried every avenue for meaning and found each one eroded by human weakness. His worldview is often called cynicism, but that word feels too shallow. What Somerset embodies is a kind of spiritual attrition, a grief so complete it becomes indistinguishable from clarity. He doesn't simply doubt the good in people. He has chronicled their cruelty so long that optimism feels grotesque. To him, civilization is a thin veneer stretched over appetite. Strip away the stories we tell ourselves, and all that remains is brutality waiting to surface. This isn't philosophical abstraction. Somerset moves through it every day, listening to the pleas of battered women, the excuses of predators, the howling silence of institutions that look the other way. His apartment is empty by design. His relationships are non-existent by necessity. He has simplified his life to avoid illusions. And yet, when he lies awake at night with a metronome ticking on his nightstand, he can't escape the sense that he's become part of the problem. His inertia is its own quiet surrender. In contrast stands Detective Mills, impulsive, idealistic, angry. Mills believes in good and evil the way a child believes in fairy tales. He carries with him a faith that action can still matter, that a single arrest, a single righteous gesture, might redeem the whole rotten system. Where Somerset has spent decades feeling the city's decay, Mills has come to fight it. But in Seven, good intentions don't survive contact with reality. Mills is not immune to the same temptations: pride, wrath, the fantasy that violence can be righteous if you're on the right side of it. That's what makes him Somerset's opposite. Not simply because he's younger, but because he still clings to the illusion that virtue and rage can coexist without consequence. The tension between them is not just generational, it is existential. One has built armor out of detachment. The other rushes forward, certain that conviction alone is protection. And surrounding them is a city rendered not merely as backdrop, but as indictment. The rain never stops. The buildings are labyrinths. Every alley hides evidence of some private apocalypse. The geography feels designed to corrode faith, brick by brick, drop by drop. Here, evil doesn't shock. It accumulates. It seeps into systems, into landlords ignoring screams behind locked doors, into the indifference of bystanders, into the routines of bureaucracy. John Doe is not an aberration. He is a symptom, a byproduct of a culture so inured to cruelty that atrocity becomes unremarkable. The film doesn't suggest that evil hides in shadows. It argues that it thrives in plain sight, amplified by apathy, protected by the sheer scale of misery no one wants to confront. The horror is not that John Doe exists. The horror is that his existence is unsurprising. Somerset rejects easy moral categories, not because he wants to, but because he no longer finds them credible. To him, the stories we tell about justice are a buffer against the truth that there is no cosmic order, no moral ledger balancing the scales. And yet, He doesn't surrender completely. He shows up. He works the case. He doesn't expect to win, but he refuses to look away. His endurance is not fueled by faith in humanity, but by the fragile belief that bearing witness might still matter, that refusing to avert his gaze might be the last act of integrity available. In most narratives, knowledge is salvation. It solves the puzzle. It restores balance. Not here. In Se7en, knowledge is a toxin. It corrodes. It infects. It dismantles illusions Mills didn't know he was clinging to. Somerset knows too much. Mills doesn't know enough. And the film never pretends there is any middle path between them. Understanding the nature of John Doe doesn't offer power. It only ensures that when the final cruelty arrives, you can't pretend you didn't see it coming. The name that echoes through the film is not spoken as a myth. It is invoked as indictment. The 7 deadly sins. Envy, wrath, lust, gluttony, greed, sloth. They are not curiosities. They are organizing principles. John Doe doesn't see himself as a monster. He sees himself as an instrument, a mirror held up to a culture so hollow that shock is the only language it still understands. His crimes are atrocities staged as sermons. He doesn't want to be caught. He wants to be seen. He wants the world to acknowledge what he believes, that beneath our rituals and civility, we are still animals, hungry, self-absorbed, violent. To name the sins is to admit something primal, something that institutions try to disguise with ceremony. John Doe isn't content to kill. He wants to curate meaning from suffering. He wants his narrative to persist after his body is gone. He dies. But in the moment he dies, the final wound lands. Mills becomes an unwilling participant in the last sin. Wrath. The line between detective and executioner dissolves. The illusion of moral superiority shatters. In that moment, Mills becomes the final piece in John Doe's design. Proof that virtue can be corrupted, that righteousness can be weaponized. In the aftermath, Somerset stands in the desert, watching a man he cannot save, a system he cannot redeem. There is no triumph, only the faint recognition that nothing will ever truly change. And yet, when he quotes Hemingway, "The world is a fine place and worth fighting for," he leaves the sentence broken. It's not optimism. It's not absolution. It's the smallest possible assertion that resignation is not the same as defeat. Maybe that flicker of conviction, however compromised, is all that remains. Se7en is not a procedural. It is a study of moral erosion, of how easy it is to cross the line you swore you'd never approach. It offers no comfort. It asks us to consider that sometimes the only victory is refusing to look away, even when everything you see corrodes what you believe. Somerset is not a hero. Mills is not a savior. John Doe is not a villain in the traditional sense. He is an argument, a brutal, unforgettable thesis about the darkness that thrives when no one is willing to confront it. And that, more than any twist or revelation, is what makes Se7en impossible to forget.